Ever get the feeling that life's just a game, yet you weren't given the rulebook? Throughout history, a select few have been given those hidden rules, letting them shape their own destinies. So in this video, I'm going to show you their step-by-step techniques to outsmart the simulation of life, making it simple and safe to manifest anything you truly want. So what are some of the things, again, those select few understood, were given, was passed down through families and secret societies and kept from view from the public, that allows them to essentially outsmart reality and in a way plug cheat codes into the game that we're playing? Now, when we talk about this being a game, understand, if you don't already, and we have many videos explaining this, that our reality operates similar to that of a simulation, almost like something that has been programmed. There are even scientists like James Gates who have found that deep in the fabric of our reality, there are bits of ones and zeros, computer code, that we would find in our own programs or computers that we have created as a fractal experience here on Earth. So we are living in this simulated-like reality, not simulated in the sense of like The Sims and like that kind of level. It's a very, very complex simulation that's kind of, as you interact with it, not supposed to reveal or show you that it's a simulation. However, it is what we are operating from. And there are people, ancient people that within these circles, people who had access to information that not only was this the case, or they would have had different terminology for it, but essentially that the physical world isn't all there is, it's coming from something greater. But they also understood these principles to such a level that they knew how to operate with them rather than against them. And they knew how to essentially do what's called or looked like using cheat codes in the game to elevate themselves within the game, to gain riches, to gain manifestations quicker. So let's go over some of the things that helped them to do this and some understandings, analogies, and other things that will help you do it. Now, one of my favorite analogies when it comes to understanding how we can interact with the game, with the simulation, with our reality in a way that's higher and more effective versus ineffective is what's called the player versus character analogy. And the way this goes is I want you to imagine that in your physical life, you are playing this character. So you have this avatar body. It interacts with the environment around it that you're in. You use your 5 senses to kind of confirm the physical environment around you, to perceive it, to collect that sensory information and collect that data, which allows you to then respond accordingly or to get this idea of what's around you and what's going on. And so you're this character that's kind of in the game. But the way most people are playing the game or living their life is they think they are only this character and they're subjected to the whims of the physical world. So this is kind of like a materialist viewpoint. Everything is physical. It kind of all came from nothing or just kind of random chance. And we live in a materialistic physical world. And so if you want to change your life from that viewpoint, the only way you can change it is through being the character and going out and changing and manipulating things from the character itself. However, when we understand that this reality didn't come randomly, that it actually came from something larger, something known as a superset, so you could think of it like there's the game, but it can't operate without the computer. And so if we can tune into the computer, we can then start influencing what shows up in the game. It also follows something that I've talked about quite a bit, that the outer world, so your physical world, the characters interacting in, you're interacting in, that physical aspect of you comes from the inner world, which in this case would be represented by the superset or the computer. And so if we can tune in to the computer or the player, the one that is playing the game in the background, it's outside the game, but is kind of dictating what the character does, if we can tune into and become more conscious of that and intentional of that part of ourselves, we can start doing different things in the game. And so the first awareness to have is you are not just a physical person living in a physical world. This physical world was born out of something non-physical. In fact, it is even said that our reality, and really let this sink in, is 99.9+% empty space and energy, and only about 0.00001% physical matter reality. This is why you get sayings such as, if you were to take all of the empty space out of every person on the world, so 8 billion plus people, if you took all the empty space out of them, you would have enough physical stuff remaining to fit within a sugar cube. That is how physical our reality actually is. It's not really that physical at all. It just appears physical, but it is coming from the non-physical, which is what most of reality is made up of. I want you to keep in mind that your player accesses the non-physical. Your character is moving around in that tiny percentage of the physical, right? It is kind of playing around with the results that are coming from the player or the non-physical. And so if we want to change the results we're getting in our physical, should we give all our energy to the character and believe that's all we are and try and kind of mold and morph and fight the physical world? Or should we learn how to tune into the part of ourselves that has access to that 99.9+% and encode different things into the game? Now, another way you could think of this player part of you is like your higher self, right? That has access to these deeper parts of reality or these higher parts of reality beyond just the physical self. Because keep in mind, you're not just a physical being. There is more to you, right? In fact, if we want to keep it simple, you can think of there being three parts to you. The physical, which we've just been talking about. You understand it's the character, your five senses. You're perceiving this narrow bandwidth of reality, frequency, or this frequency we call the physical, but there's so much more out there, but we do that through our five senses and our physical self. It's still a part of us, right? But a very small part. But it's one thing that dictates a lot of our experience, and there's reasons for that. But there's also the mental part of yourself, which is a non-physical part of yourself. These are your thoughts. This is your visualizations, imagination, and imaging. And there's the spiritual part of yourself. And what this is your connection to something higher, to God, to source, to the player part of yourself. That's how we access that. It's also your connection to the emotional self. And we can think of emotion as energy in motion. And so we want to access these part of ourselves more, because that's when we can tune into the player that can start dictating more of what shows up on screen. So essentially, we need to be more intentional with the non-physical than the physical. And I'm telling you, it is the ancients and those within secret societies and those within these circles that had this information that 100% knew about this. They knew about the power of their thoughts and why they should guard their mind, for example. They knew the power of energy, the energy of others, the energy of the room, the energy that they were currently in, cultivating that energy through things like masterminds and other things. They understood the power of this and how that went to shaping their actual physical lives, understanding that their physical lives essentially are just energetic or inner world histories. What they have been doing in the inner world up until that point. The accumulation of how they've been thinking, feeling, and everything else we mentioned in that inner world, after enough time, will start showing up in the physical. Now, why does it take time for things to show up in the physical? Well, think of it this way. If we were to look at a poll, this is basically everything that's out there. Understand that the physical stuff you experience in your life is not different from your thoughts or energy, pure energy or spirit. They are of a like kind, but to varying rates of vibration, different degrees of vibration, so speeds of vibration. Things at very fast levels of vibration typically are higher up the pole. Your thoughts, energy, emotion, you can't see them, but they exist because they just aren't in physical form. But after that vibration gets slower, it starts coming into the physical realm, and you can start seeing it and perceiving it. And again, that narrow bandwidth, which we call the physical, it now starts to show up as things we could see, we could taste, we could touch. Some of those we can do all of those things to. Some there's only a few. For example, there's certain you can see mist, but you won't be able to necessarily touch it like you would something more solid, like right here. But it's showing up in that narrow physical bandwidth that we can perceive with the five physical senses. Does that mean that's the only bandwidth in existence? No, there's so many more. In fact, again, 99.9+% of reality is much more than that narrow bandwidth in which we interact with that we call the physical. However, again, it is what we do on those two other planes that show the things up in the physical. So going back to that pole, the things that go lower down on that pole, the denser rates of vibration is the physical. And at the bottom, we can have the grossest, most dense rate of vibration in the physical. And to the top, we can have the highest rate of vibration, energy, which is like kind of instantaneous, right? For example, thoughts and emotion is more instantaneous and can be accessed very quickly. An easy way to test this, if I tell you to think of a certain thing, let's say an apple falling from a tree, you probably had a flash of that popping into your mind. If I tell you to think of the word, component or whatever, you will notice that word most likely popping in your mind unless you try to actively resist it for some reason. But you can think of that right away. It's instantaneous. Higher up the pole, higher rate of vibration. Also with emotion, energy, and motion, if I tell you to think a certain thought or a memory that you cherish. Right? I want you to think of a pet you love, a person you love, a memory that you absolutely adore. Does it change your emotional state? Yes. How long does it take? If you have good access to this, instantaneous, because it is a higher rate of vibration. But again, most people are focusing on the dense rate of vibrations to try and influence their life, i.e. they're focusing on the character, trying to change the physical world that again came from the non-physical. So instead of trying to influence what's already here and is a non-physical history of accumulated energy now showing up, why don't we go right for the non-physical to the player and what it has access to create a new non-physical history that shows up for you? So keep in mind that everything around you is simply an energetic or non-physical history. What you've been doing in the non-physical realm, intentionally or otherwise, because you always are activating that realm. For example, you're always thinking usually in some way, unless you train yourself not to, which is a very valuable skill, by the way, but usually to some degree. So just because you don't remember what you thought of doesn't mean it's not playing to this idea of creating what's in your physical. Same with the emotions. Just because you didn't want to feel those emotions doesn't mean they didn't contribute to what's showing up in your life. This is usually when it's unconscious or unintentional. So we want to make this more intentional. We want to access our higher self or the player. So the player can start moving the character around to where, again, it intuitively knows the character needs to go, to start plugging and encoding new things in the game to show up in your life. And the way we do this, again, is through the inner world, our thoughts and our connection to the player via our emotions, thoughts, and things in the inner world. One idea I love when it comes to this in kind of, again, outsmarting reality, if we want to call it that, or influencing your reality. Really, you're not outsmarting reality. Reality is more than receptive to allowing you to work with it. In fact, it kind of wants you to do that, but it will give you the free will to completely not do that as well and be the character trying to fight this narrow bandwidth that exists because you don't like what's there. It'll let you do it because you have free will. But you absolutely can also cooperate with it to create unbelievably amazing things in your life by accessing the player. And one of the sayings I absolutely love is you want to be at what's called cause and not effect. And we all know what cause and effect is. But cause and effect doesn't just work in the physical, in that narrow bandwidth that we can perceive through the five senses that we call the physical. It also works on the higher planes of your existence. So cause and effect is also in operation in the spirit part of yourself, in the mental. And let me just throw this in here as well. Advanced cause and effect goes like this. What you do on the mental and spiritual part of yourselves creates effects in your physical life. So I'll say that again, kind of a little bit differently. The causes you dwell upon or activate in your thinking, your visualizations, your imaginations, what you dwell upon, and the causes you dwell upon in your emotional self, connection to the player, is going to create the effects you see in your physical life. Cause and effect works from inner to outer. The outer follows the inner world. The outer is the effect of what you have been doing, the causes you have been creating and dwelling upon in the inner world. So you want to be at cause in your life. You want to take initiative in thinking better, in feeling better, in connecting to the player more intentionally, and that will create more favorable effects in your life. Now that brings us to one of my favorite principles, because this is kind of the main principle of our reality and universe, and it is called the law of balance and harmony. So what's important to understand here is that everything in our reality is aiming to achieve balance and harmony. Now, before you jump the gun and go, I don't see too much harmony in this and that, understand when I say harmony in context with this law, it doesn't mean harmony in the sense of positivity. Right? So, well, where's the love? Where's the peace in this situation? It just means harmonizing. It just means balancing with. Meaning, for example, if you're on a frequency of fear, what would be the harmony to fear? More fear. Right? If you're on a frequency of thinking in a way that's more positive, there will be a corresponding harmonizing with that. Meaning what you are giving, you will get back. It will harmonize with whatever it is. Not necessarily harmonize in the sense of the positive connotation of, oh, there's more harmony, peace, clarity, this kind of thing here. It just means it'll be in tune with whatever that thing is. And this is important to know because, again, a lot of people want change, they want transformation, but they're thinking in a way that's just not serving that. They're feeling that way. They're always in their character. They're resisting and complaining about life. They're in victim mode. And then the law of balance and harmony goes, well, to balance and harmonize this, we need your outer world to match that. It needs to balance with your inner world, which is here. So we will harmonize with the fear that you've been giving us. We will harmonize with the guilt and shame, with the jealousy or whatever else it is. And life will go perfect. we will harmonize with this. Now keep in mind that the law of balance and harmony does not care in what ways it harmonizes. It's not moral or has a preference on how it balances or harmonizes. It is just concerned with balancing and harmonizing. So here is the trick, and here is really where, again, we could even apply the idea of outsmarting reality, because this is kind of a very cool way of going about this. Again, it's not actually what's happening. You're working with natural principles that are out there, and now you're just understanding what they are. But the way to change your physical life, the things in your life, the finances, the relationships, whatever else, is you actually need to put yourself out of harmony with your environment through your inner world. Essentially, you need your inner world to be imbalanced with your physical world. So let's say your physical world is here and your inner world has had to have been there for at least some time to have created this. You raise your inner world and your physical world is now here. The law of balance notices that and goes, we need to balance this. And so we just need to stay here long enough for the physical to start catching up. Remember, the physical is the densest rate of vibration, like mentioned, so it takes time for it to catch up and show up in this narrow bandwidth we call the physical reality. It just takes time because it's a dense rate of vibration, meaning it needs more particle flow, it needs energy for longer for it to start showing up. So I want to approach this a little bit differently and have you think about it from this perspective. So I want you to think about all of the cells you have in your body. And I want you to imagine, because it's true, when you think certain thoughts or feel a certain way, it creates a certain environment for your cells within your body. I want you to also imagine that your cells in your body, we can go even deeper, we can say molecules, we can say whatever, but cells makes this pretty vivid. All of the cells, the billions or however many cells you have in your body, are all vibrating and sending out a vibration. Meaning, if you are giving them an environment that's negative thinking, negative feeling, and whatever else, the cells are taking on that energy and then vibrating out that energy 24/7. In fact, cells actually have something called receptor sites that kind of allows them to adjust to the weather outside or the environment that you're giving. So when you're giving a more positive environment, they will vibrate in a different way than if you are giving them a more negative environment. Again, kind of what you're dumping into your bloodstream, kind of emotionally, the chemicals you're dumping in there will affect the cells of your body. And so what I'm getting at is you want to create such an environment through your thoughts and your emotions that the cells in your body are vibrating in a way that's dramatically different than your current physical circumstances. They are vibrating so high because of the environment you've created for them. And because they're vibrating so high, your physical world is here, densest rate of vibration, but you're vibrating here. Every cell in your body is now vibrating in this higher place. The law of balance has to make a move. Now, there's only two ways in which balance can occur. You may have already guessed what it is. If you're here in the inner world and the outer world is here, there's two ways. Either after enough time, because this is a dense rate of vibration, it has to by law come up and match your inner state and the way you are vibrating. Or the other way is, here's your physical circumstance, you're up here, something happens, you're getting impatient, it is not going the way you think it should go, and you come back down to where your physical environment is. So your inner world goes back down. You give an environment again that's more negative, your cells are now vibrating a different thing, and now balance and harmony has been maintained. Remember what I said earlier. The law of balance and harmony doesn't care in which way the balance occurs. It just needs the balance and harmony to occur. It succeeded in its eyes as much if it brings you back down as it did if it came up and created circumstances, events, and people that allowed your physical to match your new inner. And so our goal is to put ourselves out of balance so the inner world is up here and remain here long enough for the physical to start catching up and coming in. This is why people who do this correctly seem to go through quantum jumps or quantum leaps in their life when it comes to their success. Like almost out of nowhere, that opportunity showed up. People will call them lucky or fortunate or in the right place at the right time. And that's typically not what happened. They just did this, either knowingly or unknowingly. They stayed in a higher inner state, and the physical, after enough time, had to catch up because it is a law of the universe. It is a principle, and it is one of the foundational principles of how our reality works. So, using what you have learned so far, you want to put yourself out of balance in a positive way so that that densest rate of vibration, that energetic history, has to catch up and match what that is, whatever that inner world state is. And again, through the law of balance and harmony, that is what's going to occur so long as you persist with keeping the inner world high, connecting to the player, and doing things from that level rather than getting dragged into the character. Another great way to look at this is have more faith in your vision, keeping yourself elevated inwardly, than the current physical circumstances. If you get seduced into the physical circumstances, it's again like playing the character, forgetting that you have that other side of yourself. Getting victimized by what's in your life, forgetting you can go into the player and start influencing future events. And so we want to make sure that that's what's occurring. Now, I want to give you something that's going to help with this, because if you have something called a DCA and you do this correctly, it is going to help you in doing this so much more effectively, because it's going to allow you to focus on creating this out of balance that you need for change. And I go over how to do that in this video here. And so if you combine what you learned today with creating a DCA and sticking with it, you will absolutely enact and activate the law of balance powerfully in a pretty short amount of time.